there are a number of the natural history stories that probably we want to tell in more depth when you've got some of your, or Toby's even, our 17-year-old's photographs queued up to include some of them. But I would just like to mention the harbor seals that we get to spend time with nearly every day here, who show up and look with interest at our dog, at our Labrador, when she shows up on the shore with us. It makes me wonder what they think about what is going on land. I wrote at the beginning of this year that I didn't exactly make resolutions this year, but I wrote in natural selections on my substack that I want to befriend seals this year, and I would like to, and we have been paddleboarding a couple of times out in amongst them. I don't need to make friends with sea lions. They're a bit more interested in demonstrating that they have power, and they also have much bigger teeth.
You want detente with sea lions.
Yes, very much want detente with the sea lions, but friends with the seals. And I think they might be interested, but they're really interested in the dog. It is as if they see a kindred spirit, meaning actually in this case kin, from not too long ago.
So I would just, for anybody who is wondering whether you are imagining things, the telling signature of their interest is that they're facing us. Almost any time you're out there, they're looking at us, and Maddie in particular is a focus. And
they turn their heads and watch her walk up and down.
Yeah. So they really do seem interested. There's of course a part of me that, worries if we took Maddie out on a boat, if we went in, if he'd be safe. But I do think it does look more like curiosity than anything.
Yeah, it really does. And we've also got bald eagles who are appearing to hunt gull eggs, as far as we can tell.
Gull or goose?
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly what all is going on out there, but I don't know that we've seen goose nesting in the place that the eagles go and flush the gulls off of. So this is just watching life come back into its own as nearly every organism at this point is about to start reproducing, or is in the middle of it, or is already protecting their young. Spring is inherently a time of great activity and ferocity. And we saw this up in southeastern Alaska, where we were last week as well, about which, again, we will say more in the future. But specifically, we saw a number of sea otters with babies, which is just about one of the most adorable things you can imagine. And we saw sea stars. So I wrote about this for my Substack today, and I will link that in the show notes. But sea stars used to be incredibly common along the west coast of North America. I remember them from tide pools when I was growing up in Southern California, and we have been living in the Pacific Northwest now since 2002, and they used to be all over the place, encrusted on pilings in any kind of tide pool situation. And anytime you were in the water, such as kayaking in a shallow rocky shore, a shallow rocky intertidal habitat, you would find them. And
high diversity too. We're talking
incredibly high diversity.
10 recognizable morphs. I don't know how many species, but
more than that even. Apparently there are. So the bit of research I did for my Substack today, there are 1,900 species worldwide, and this is not the hotspot for them. They're actually more diverse in, I think it was Indian Ocean especially, and maybe Atlantic as well. But there have been many species here. And about 2013, there was a massive die-off. And there have been some die-offs before. Of course, numbers fluctuate, but specifically the dominant, like the keystone predator, the first species that was ever called a keystone predator in the ecological literature, in fact, by Robert Payne, different Robert Payne than we went to.
The other.
The other Robert Payne. So there was a Robert Payne who was on the faculty, an ornithologist, University of Michigan. This is the other Robert Payne. He literally wrote, and I don't have it up, but it's the ochre sea star, as such an effective generalist predator, that it was this species, that keystone predator was a term that was described for first.
So forgive me, I don't see color and don't pay as much attention. I don't know what ochre is, but
like gold, brown, yellow.
gold brown. So it's not the purplish one.
Yeah, and so this is the sort of conceit of my piece, which is short, and I encourage those of you to read it. It begins this way. I'll just read the first paragraph. Once upon a time, you could kayak the waters of the Salish Sea around Seattle or Vancouver, off of Whidbey Island or Orcas or Vashon, and find sea stars in a rainbow of colors. There were bright orange sea stars and others in salmon pink. Some were pale yellow, many of them a rocky beige. Some sported an almost luminescent blue. There were even purple ones. Most had 5 arms, some had 6, and some had many more than that. There were sea stars visible in any clear water that was shallow enough to see the sea floor. Now there are almost none. And I go on and explain a bit about what sea stars are phylogenetically and to what the die-off that began in 2013 has been attributed, and say, I don't buy it, right? That none of the supposed mechanisms that have been proposed for what is called sea star wasting disease seem fully explanatory. And to its credit, the research that I've read on this acknowledges that. People are kind of making stabs, and hopefully not entirely the dark, at what is going on there. But the experience that we had in southeastern Alaska this week.
Wait, before you move on to that, I just want to point out that as this was happening, as wasting disease was beginning to be recognized, this was something you could also observe. Yes. The sea stars, as they disappeared, it wasn't just simply that their numbers dropped. You could actually go to the seashore and see animals that, were missing a limb and oozing. And it was quite sad and alarming if you were familiar with these things. And, sometimes you would find one that wasn't wasting, and it was kind of exciting. And, at this point, how many have we seen since moving up to the San Juans in September?
Well, more than we had seen in years, but I think we saw 3.
Yeah. It's a tiny number.
It was 1, maybe 2 in the previous several years.
Yeah, and it would literally have been every time you looked over a dock, you would see multiples. You wouldn't even realize most of the time, it was like background. It was like looking at trees.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and the way that this syndrome affects these animals looks very excruciating. And apparently, I learned from the bit of research I read this week, the first sign is that they lose interest in food. So they stop eating first, and then their arms twist and contort. And we saw that too, right? They do but the most sort of grotesque part of it is the point at which their tissue seems to lose coherence, right? And they sort of ooze and melt and die. And then they disappear entirely, and they're basically gone. Except we were in a double kayak in a bay off of Chichikov Island, west of Juneau, south of Icy Strait, south of Glacier Bay National Park, this last week in shallow water, shallow, clear water at low tide. And we saw all sorts of stuff. We saw sea cucumbers and anemones and a little run of salmon, and a lot of clams opened up, clam shells, and again, a few otters on the surface of the water, and so many sea stars. And I don't know, I was not able to ascertain with regard to that spot if somehow they never died off there, or if they did and they're coming back. Because I have heard anecdotally from some number of people who say, yep, I'm on the Salish Sea, which is basically just the area that includes the Puget Sound and up into the San Juan and Gulf Islands. That includes Seattle and Vancouver as the biggest cities in the area. I've heard from people on the Salish Sea and the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia and farther south like Oregon coast who say, yeah, they were totally gone, but I'm beginning to see them back now. So it's possible that the colder water of Southeast Alaska, which is understood to slow the procession of the disease, but doesn't actually halt it in its tracks, maybe was a little bit protective. Maybe it didn't get so far. Maybe it's allowing them to come back faster. I don't know. I don't know if they were gone, they're coming back, or they were always there. But seeing the sea stars there gave me hope in a world that seems incredibly bleak across so many domains, including and especially ecologically. It really gave me hope. And, we were seeing that same, the conceit that I mentioned earlier of the piece is that I finish with clamshells littered the shallow sea floor. This is again on off Chichikov Island in southeast Alaska, open and broken and scattered, but the other organisms that were not just present but abundant were sea stars. There were bright orange ones and others in salmon pink. Some were pale yellow, many of them a rocky beige. Some sported an almost luminescent blue. There were even purple ones. Most had 5 arms, some had 6, and some had many more than that. It looks like not a perfect match, but a similar match for the species that should have been there before, where we've never been before, but that we had seen in the Salish Sea some hundreds of miles south.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I wish we knew whether or not that was a change or whether those were isolates that were preserved through the wasting disease. But yes, it sure would be wonderful if they returned. That would be a sign that whatever catastrophe had befallen them was passing, at least.
It absolutely would.
Yeah.